Hi, everybody, and happy cold weather if you're anywhere where it's really cold, like we have been here in most of the United States anyway. Hope you're all doing well today. Uh, this is one of the topics where I'm not necessarily the expert, and so this is more about why you should do benchmarking and that it is still a useful, valuable method or tool if some of you folks have been out there a long time. But we do have one of our experts online, although you won't hear from him today. We do have a staff member who runs our benchmarking program, Brad Wood. So if you have any real technical questions, I just want to direct you to Brad after our session here. In any case, 5 ways benchmarking enables sustainable business results. A little movement there to keep you guys awake today. What I want to do is talk about the 5 reasons, kind of lead up to them and give you the 5 reasons why you should think about benchmarking, and particularly sustaining results. I always get the question, 2 questions. One in the beginning when we work with organizations is, well, how good should this process be? How good should our service be? How fast should we be? How few defects should we be? And that leads to answering the question, well, how good do you need to be? And so one is you want to have some comparative information to say, the targets are achievable. Because so many times you hear there's no way that we could get to that target. Well, someone else in your industry did. And the second one is we now have spent time making improvements, and we're at a new level of performance. How can we keep moving forward? Well, benchmarking can be used there too to get your internal organization all up to your level of performance and then have an ongoing review of external. So sustaining results is pretty important, and we think benchmarking is one of those ways to do it. But we also want to talk a little bit about what benchmarking is and what it is not, um, and give you some lessons learned as well. As you know, introduction, Juran Global, remember Dr. Juran and our books that we write and benchmarking training material. We actually have been benchmarking organizations, particularly in specialty industries like oil and gas, for about the last 20 years. The organization's been around for about 36. And benchmarking was made popular back in the mid to late 80s when Xerox started to go outside of the organization and outside of their industry to be able to see what else other industries were doing. That led to a kind of a whole new method for the process improvement industry to latch onto. So we have been advising, benchmarking, assessing, educating, and certifying for quite a few years. Hopefully some valuable information you can get out of today's session. If not, you can always reach us at the web at juran.com. So let me just do a little definition of benchmarking, because some of you probably come from the schools. Years ago we did benchmarking. Nobody does it anymore. Or we've done benchmarking, it didn't really pan out for us, or we did benchmarking, it was great. So, what is benchmarking? And prior to this book by Robert Camp in the mid to late 80s, benchmarking was relatively something that you did when you visited someone accidentally. And Xerox, looking for ways to improve its performance, started doing some new things. And Bob Camp was one of the first people to write about it, and that book kind of set off a whole wave in the 90s and early 2000s, and then kind of slept a bit. But it's still alive and well, and now, due to technology, it's even easier to do, although it makes it harder to sort the facts from the fiction today. Bob Camp was one of the people that created the training material we used in our benchmarking programs, and later on, we started doing our own benchmarking. And what that means is that it's an activity that organizations use for discovering better and best practices. And I say better and best because you don't always have to have the best. You just need to get better than you are, or better than your competition, or to establish that leadership position. You can identify, as some of you know, the best organizations, and they get accolades, whether it's the best organization to work for, the best organization with their known customer service, or whether the organization is best known for its healthcare. So you can benchmark organizations. And when you benchmark an organization, you're typically relying on what information is out there that we could go grab. Other types of benchmark, we benchmark products. apple-to-apple comparisons. How's their product versus our product? An example of that back in the uh, one of our clients, Duracell. Duracell on a quarterly basis used to get competitive products, completely put them through an analysis, compare them to their products, and then work with each of their manufacturing sites and design sites to move their product quality up and beyond the level of competitive products. And they did that every quarter, every year. Product comparisons are easier if you can afford to buy the products. Targets of performance, meaning how good is that product? What level of defect? What level of speed? What's their cycle time? Those targets of performance are a little bit harder to find and therefore require more investigative work, even some visits to organizations, as does how do they achieve these targets? What are the business practices they use? A lot of the business practices, folks like us and yourselves, carry out in the organization. For instance, we use Lean and Six Sigma because it's a business practice that helps drive out defects, improve cycle time. But if we want to find out what the organization is doing, we need to go find out. So benchmarking is not just about who's the best, but also can get into some detail. We've been doing it for a while. We've got some lessons learned, and really today's session is about some of those lessons learned that we do. For instance, we have a very sophisticated oil and gas benchmarking program, and this oil and benchmarking program breaks up that industry into various parts, like processing facilities, gas transmission, storage, and loading. And so if you are an entire oil and gas exploration company, you might benchmark the entire picture. If you're just a processing facility, you might want to benchmark to others in your processing facility. So through this oil and gas benchmarking, we've gotten quite a bit of experience about what to do and not to do. Oil and gas obviously may not be the industry you're in, but the importance is that when you benchmark industries on an ongoing basis, as we do, you'll find the driver of performance is knowing who's going to leapfrog you in the next benchmark. So the benchmarks that we do and the benchmark studies we do are ongoing annual benchmarks in this industry and others. Currently we're setting up a knowledge management benchmark. We've done procurement benchmarking. And the goal there is people pay to join the benchmark to find out what the other people are actually doing. A benchmarking program like this gets you the best information, but is one of the most difficult to set up. Hence, this is why organizations like us do that. So let me ask you a question, since somebody threw that up there. Do you have any form of a benchmarking program, and can you complete, this will be a little bit longer for those who have been on here a while. We want to get a little bit more information, so take your time here and really take a look at it to make sure that you're getting it right. And it doesn't have to be a formal benchmarking program. You could say we don't do any kind of benchmarking, or we've done some limited. So about half of you don't have anything, which is not surprising. That's hopefully why you've joined the conversation here. And some of you have done internal benchmarking, which is absolutely the first place to start before you go outside. And some of you have done some little external benchmarking. So hopefully those of you have some of the lessons learned we have. Some people call benchmarking stealing shamelessly. And if you recall, that's kind of competitive espionage, and it's perfectly legitimate as long as you don't do anything illegal. But it's been going on for a long time. But the why you do benchmarking is particularly important to us, and what to benchmark. So if we think of our organization as wanting to go from a low level of performance or somebody in trouble to the best of the best, it's not always going to be a straight line. There's going to be a zigzag line. And for every gain, which is an upward movement, and every steepness of the slope, which is an even better gain, is a result of some activity. That activity could be driven by DMAIC or lean or process improvement activity, and it could be established by understanding what other companies are doing, such as benchmarking. We often use benchmarking as a means to set targets in a DMAIC project and identify solutions and the level of goodness those solutions should be. But so as if we're moving up this line, and over time we'd like to go higher and higher, the driver of that tends to be how good do we have to be and can we afford to do it? So the reality is we first begin by looking inside the organization. Who within the organization? If we're a large organization, we probably have somebody in here who's better than we are. So let's find out what they are and let's move to their level. So we're going to move up to this level. And then and if we're doing well or not doing well, we want to go outside, we can go look at an external benchmark. And then eventually, we might even want to know who the best in class is. So if we're on this plane and we don't know how much improvement we should have or what to use or what business practice to use, we go out and find out. And so we want to look first internally, then externally, and then the best. Now, when we look externally, it could be in our own competitive marketplace or it could be outside competition. Many organizations in the United States benchmark Disney World or Disneyland because they have the best means of moving people. Have some of the best customer service and customer experiences. So people tend to go there, go to their educational centers and learn what they do, and then come back and try to emulate that best practice. A lot of folks in manufacturing look at Toyota as the best practice in quality and reduction of defects. And so we look at what those things are that they do. So what we want to keep in mind is that we are only benchmarking so we can get better and better. We don't have to go from here to here, we don't have to go from here and go right up to here because that may not be necessary. We might be able to just significantly improve by jumping to the best of our own internal organization. Another why benchmarking. Well, we need to know if our current performance levels are good enough. Now, the healthcare industry in the U.S. that I can speak for has a lot of new information available that can tell you how well a given hospital is doing versus its population as compared to another hospital. There's a whole bunch of information there. Zagat's guide tells you what restaurants are out there that are better than each other. Yelp, various benchmarking consortiums. There's information out there that can tell you how you are doing versus some of the industry standards or current performance levels. Another reason why you might want to benchmark is to quantify the improvement potential. So for instance, if our organization is operating at the 50th percentile in customer service, and that equates to response time to customers, and the competitor is at 75% and the best in class is at 95%, what's the improvement opportunity going from 50 to 75 to 95? Is there a cost opportunity? Is there a revenue opportunity? A third one, it helps identify strengths and weaknesses of what you have and don't have. So for instance, we might be good at some things, not good at others. So by going out and comparing ourselves to others, we'll be able to find out what we're good at and what we're not good at. That's why we do assessments of all type internally. Benchmarking is actually a form of an assessment. It assesses you compared to someone else outside of your industry versus an assessment like an ISO 9000 or any kind of industry standard. You're comparing yourself to a set of guidelines. It can help focus your improvement activities. How many times has your organization or you've seen in your experience that there's so many things we can fix? The question is, which ones are going to give us the biggest bang for the buck? And we might be able to find that in another industry, there were certain types of things they had to do which got them a greater improvement than doing them all. So it helps focus. And lastly, it's good evidence for new decision making. By a show of hands, how many of you ever heard this in your organization? It's going to cost us too much money to get to that level. Or another way to put it is, no one's ever achieved that level before. We'll never get there. And if you don't have any information to back that up, no evidence, and people are going to not move to the new level, and possibly somebody else is going to. So evidence in the form of information that can be used to help you guys make a better decision, which is usually, should we move to this new level of performance or not? Should we go to 2-hour response time versus 24-hour response time? Thank you for some of you who have raised their hands. I appreciate that. Another way to think about why benchmarking, if we look at it, is to really get a handle on our KPIs. What should we be operating to? And these KPIs, or whatever you use, once we get a comparison KPI, we have a new target, we can decide if we need to move forward because of our comparison says we're okay, or not move forward. If there's a gap, then we can then discuss that best-in-class gap and figure out what to do about it. It also, by finding the target, we also might find some other business practices that help us change our business practice. So it's not just the target, but also how did they achieve the target. And then we take that information back and we try to share it among ourselves so that we can actually get some changes in the organization so that we can continuously improve our performance. So benchmarking information could be very valuable. Another thing to think about is who out there is doing it better than we are on one side, but also really the importance of benchmarking is how are they doing it. Now, so many people want to go out and benchmark and find all these folks. For instance, the National Quality Award, National Performance Award in the United States, the Baldrige Award, allows and requires the winners to share the knowledge they've gained from their journey. And to the organization who won, that is a good thing to do, but it takes a lot of time on the part of the organization. So a lot of them limit, benchmarking activity. However, those same folks transfer a lot of their knowledge into articles and papers that you can be found on the internet or in public library, university library. They talk about how they are doing it. We always try to get the best possible benchmarking before we do anything. And what we want to encourage you to do is try to glean new information that can help you, but don't try to assume you're going to find all the information that's going to help you. It's just piece by piece. So one, you might want to look at who are the top performers regardless of the industry. Another might be competitive look. Who are our industry leaders and why are they our leaders? And you can look internally, who are internal top performers. We had an organization, global organization, over 50 different sites, and we found that one of their sites had the best performance in the industry. So they don't really have to go very far to find out why that site was the best. All they had to do is get everybody to go learn it within their own organization and move everybody up. So if you have multiple sites, you can take a look internally. If all your sites are underperforming, that's when you need to look externally, because you're probably a reason why you're not meeting some numbers, not being competitive, or not being where you want to be is because the total target may be low. So who to benchmark? People who are best in class in our organization, outside our organization, in our industry, and outside the industry. Recently I spoke at a pharmaceutical supply chain event, excuse me, and my recommendation was the pharmaceutical industry should start looking at the automotive industry in terms of quality, or the aerospace industry, because there are fewer defects in the aerospace industry than there have been in the pharmaceutical industry. And it's possible that the pharmaceutical systems that are trying to produce better and better drugs are not as good as those in defense or aerospace. So you may have to look outside. So what is benchmarking? Who to benchmark? And think about the who to benchmark. I would say it's a kind of a cast of characters. You're moving from direct competitors, which might be very difficult, but if you're in a product world, you can always buy the product and kind of reverse engineer. If you're in the same industry but not competitive, that would be like someone in the retail industry. We're in clothing and someone else is in sporting goods, or someone's in sporting goods and we're in home improvement, but we're all in the same industry. Latent competitors, new competitors, business partners, you might even be your suppliers. Suppliers tend to be some of the best people to check out what they're doing, especially if they're better than you. And then when you look outside the industry, you're just looking at some generic things like Walt Disney can help us move people faster. Who's the best in customer service? So there's a compendium of opportunity here to benchmark. And you're also, when you think about the competition, you have your direct competitions and the potential competitors. And a potential competitor may be outside your industry. As I was at a record industry event for the Grammys recently, and it was Apple who changed the face of the music industry by creating the iTunes product, not the music industry. And I learned that the music industry had I believe it was about a $24 billion revenue per year prior to iTunes, and after a few years that went down to $6 billion. So iTunes wasn't, or Apple was not considered in the music industry, but they almost put the music industry out of the number one product they have. So potential competition could come from others. Amazon, I don't know, is anybody here from Amazon? Amazon has been very good at competing against people who are not in the industry, mainly because they have this ability to move product very quickly from warehouse to customer. Well, if you're making sporting goods and you're selling them all around the country, and all of a sudden Amazon finds a better way to move that sporting good, now all of a sudden you're competing with Amazon, which you never did before. So the potential competitors are worth looking at as non-competitors. So let me ask you again here, another poll. I actually went backwards. Sometimes I do that. But take a look at this little poll here. As we say, these polls are not just for us to get an idea who you guys are, but also for you to see who around you there are. I like it. Not too hard for me to finish my presentation and actually try to meet some of these goals. Okay, the majority of specific steps required of a benchmarking program, how to take our current benchmarking to the next level. Okay, great. I just find it so hard sometimes when I don't get feedback because I can't see you. Anybody got a question? Start throwing them up there on the chart here. That way we don't have to wait till the end. For those of you who have followed the other webinars, so we talk about what is benchmarking, who to benchmark, and how about when to benchmark. We don't believe you should benchmark everything. We believe your benchmarking should be topical. So for instance, if we're in the quality of design phase, we're trying to create new products, new services, the objective might be, let's go find out how good our goals have to be for the designing of the features of this service. And so what we can learn from benchmarking is obviously learn those targets from the best, set achievable goals, and then possibly design better processes because the processes those companies used were better than the ones we have. If we're trying to control or maintain compliance, Sarbanes-Oxley is a good example of a compliance program that everybody had to do after our big crisis here in 2008 financially, or any kind of industry regulatory compliance program. The control and compliance objective is to maintain a performance level that's acceptable to you and your customer. What benchmarking can do is help give you more information if you're actually holding it at the right level, and make sure you maintain the gains from that level. And of course, breakthrough improvement methods, it can help get you to superior results. We talk about the word breakthrough. Any process can be improved, but if you're improving at a 10% level and your competition is improving at a 50% level, you're going to be way behind. So setting improvement targets based on external information from someone else who has done it better can set higher standards, higher levels of performance, and also force you to pick the projects that are going to get you up that road faster. So I got a question, and it says, have we done benchmarking in the education field? Actually, the first benchmark close to education field is our knowledge management one, but it's going to be in business education, whereas I believe you're looking at primary and secondary education. We have not conducted that, and I'm not that clear on who may do it, but as a past teacher and participation in secondary education, the standards that are set in the United States are set in a similar way they are in healthcare by the state testing of students and their performance levels, but no, we do not do that. But thank you for that question. And I'm probably going to guess you'd like to see that done either because you're an educator or because you're a taxpayer who would like to see an improvement. So when I take a look at why benchmarking, there are really 5 areas that can enable your sustainment. But if we think about an organization setting a vision, that is our strategy, where we're going, and we assess our current performance to see how we're doing against that vision, and then we set goals and plans to close or improve that performance. We implement those improvements, and we try to sustain that. So if this is our thinking, that we have a vision, we have a certain level of performance, we want to set goals, new plans, implement improvements, and sustain results. How does benchmarking help us? Well, first of all, benchmarking can help us make sure that our vision is actually a useful vision. Is it really a basis for action? We want to be the best hospital in the world. Well, is that really necessary? What does that actually mean? So if we have statements like that, we want to make sure that we have some basis of proof that it can actually be done. Or that we find that someone else doesn't have a certain vision, and that enables us to create a new vision. So the first one, you can't have sustainable improvement if you have a bad vision or a bad direction. So one, it helps us give us a basis for vision, basis for action. The second one is, how do we stand compared to that vision? So we could look at our current performance to others' performance and identify gaps. So right now, the Googles and the Yahoos and folks like that, their vision is to be the leader, if not already one, the leader in search engine capability. So they're constantly assessing current performance, looking at the gaps, and trying to close on those gaps as one beats the other one out every day. The third area is that these goals could be set on some external reality. So many times you hear this, I want to be the 98th percentile because I think that's where we should be. Well, if your nearest competitor is in the 50th percentile, do you really need to be in 98? So it helps you get some reality to these large goals. It helps you learn how goals are attained. What did they do to achieve them? Did they carry out DMAIC projects, project by project? Did they do rapid improvement events? Did they train everybody in the organization? Did they implement some new technology? What was it that they actually did? And then the fifth one is a benchmarking program, like a continuous improvement or process improvement program, give you the starting point to maintain performance by continually monitoring best practice, because if you do the first 4, you're going to have better metrics, better KPIs, and you've already learned where to look outside, so it helps you. So if we find that, hey, someone else just moved to a lower defect level, or someone else just got a new cycle time, or someone else came up with this brilliant way of shipping product around the world faster, what should we adjust? Can we adjust our vision? Can we adjust our goals? Can we adjust and implement new solutions? So those 5 things we find are very important. The benchmarking programs that we do, which is the only ones I can talk to openly from a specificity point of view, we go through a 7-step process that is similar to most benchmarking programs, but what we try to do first is try to understand, and we call it a positioning analysis, phase 1, that is amongst our constituents who are participating that are comparing each other to each other. We do a planning phase. What is it that you want to compare? What is it that you want to learn? Then we set up the research, the visits, the information gathering. That information gathering could be electronic, it could be through discussion, it could be through forums. And with all information, there has to be some form of normalization. For instance, if we are a hospital and we're benchmarking Walt Disney, clearly there's one significant difference between the two, is that Walt Disney rarely is intending to deal with sick patients as a hospital does. So we normalize that data, and that's one of the hardest things to do in benchmarking. are we capable of taking this information and applying it in our industry? So then from that information, we identify who the best practice is, and then we put together a presentation. So this is the upfront planning, followed by taking that information and disseminating it so we learn from the best practice. So let's say we have 10 organizations all doing steps 1 through 4. When it comes to step 5, we're all in the room together. We're all sharing information about what we learned from the analysis. We may not know necessarily which person in the room had the best practice. We just know someone in the room did. And so they're anonymous to that point. So when we benchmark, we have organizations that join a benchmarking program. We have other benchmarking where our client says, can you go out and compare us to this? So sanitation and safety, who's got the best sanitation and safety? That's more of a research-based where we have to go out and look and find the information and bring it back. But in general, the steps in benchmarking are very similar. Here's an example of the complexity sometimes of benchmarking. So one area that oil and gas likes to benchmark is efficiency. And what does efficiency mean? Well, they have a metric, total facility time and costs. That's broken down functionally, and then those functions are broken down into smaller bits. So these are the areas that these oil and gas companies would like to benchmark, or a portion of it, or a piece of it. Then they also look at the cost and time associated with those, because those are the things that drive most of that. And the other part of that is effectiveness. What metrics, what areas do they have that say we're effective, not just efficient? And so what you're trying to do is get through dialogue, what are the things that are most important from efficiency or effectiveness, one or the other or both, and then identify what's the best way we're going to find that information so that we can compare apples to apples. Oops, let me go back one moment here. When we are, if you're a hospital, if you're a bank, if you're a insurance company, some of the first levels, throughput, utilization, availability, or these things might pertain to you, but them in itself are too vague. You have to get down to very specific metrics to measure. Otherwise, you're just going to get vague information. So what makes it different industry by industry, benchmarking by benchmarking, is these smaller, less or more detailed levels of metric comparison. Where do we get benchmark information? Well, one thing that Xerox did many years ago and told us was the cheapest place to get it was in the library. That library is now called web searching. When we went to the libraries, and for those of you who are too young, those are places where they actually store books and materials and magazines that you actually went to and checked out, brought home, read, researched, and brought back. Today, obviously, we do that online. But one thing the libraries were good at was making sure that the information in them were typically real. So one of the problems with online searches today is that you have to have credible references for the information you do pull up, because there's a lot of erroneous information out there that could lead you to believe an organization is better than it is. But what we found when you do an online search is you find an organization who might be a candidate and then try to reach out to that organization for the evidence and the proof that it's actually true. So online searches have been a very good way to start. Specific online searches or visitation to professional and trade associations. Many societies do comparisons for the sake of the industry. They create standards from that information, and they even regulate against some of that information. A third one is folks like us who collect information because of the nature of our business. We are in the process improvement industry, and we see what a lot of folks are doing, and we get them to do storyboards, and we get them to write about those processes. So today it's actually easier to benchmark without physically going anywhere than it was before. But the physical trips obviously are a fun thing to do, but beware that organizations aren't as open to doing them as they had in the past. So we still believe that one of the best ways to benchmark is through research with some contact information, industry groups, and possibly finding out what's already out there available that gives us enough information to move forward. as is my next poll. This always hurts when this thing comes up here because, oh, thank you. One of you put, this is great stuff. I'm learning a lot. There we go. Now the real truth comes out. Okay, good. Benchmark, the worry we had today, benchmarking today, people don't talk too much about it, but we see it a lot, and it's good. And so think about it. Mark stated, have you found difficulties in benchmarking any specific industries or groups, such as defense? If that was I can only speak to the United States on defense, but actually defense, aerospace, to benchmark, one reason is there's not a lot of competition. A lot of our government projects are given out sole contracts, so it's actually much easier to do. Plus, they have industry standards and metrics that force you to. There are certain industries that we tried to get benchmarking programs up and running in, and due to the, I would say, lack of maturity or lack of sophistication, we weren't able to. For instance, we would like to tackle the mining industry because there were a lot of mining accidents, and so the mining industry we tried. There's a lot of the easy ones, banking, where there's a lot of similar organizations scattered in many places. Hospitals, a lot of places, very similar activity. So the hard ones are those industries that probably have a less mature level of knowledge or in terms of performance. So that's about the best answer I can give. But I'm going to pass your note along to Brad, and maybe Brad can come up with another one as well. What kind of results do you get? Well, if we identify best practices, we get new designs. And new designs help us make more money or help us be more efficient or more effective. One of my favorites is myths are destroyed. So many times when a new product comes on the market and it's, 50% cheaper than the prior model, the myth gets destroyed that somebody else did it cheaper. But if you were in there telling your people, we need to make it 50% less costly, they would believe you. They would say, no way, we don't need to do that. Nobody has it. So by getting information, it actually destroys the myth, which then leads you to a change. And so you start moving down that path. It helps you identify the investments. A positive one is if we don't know what target to go to, then we're not going to sure how much money or time we're going to put into that. So if we have a better understanding, we have a better investment requirement identified. Therefore, we get a better return on investment information up front. And the last one, we actually get KPIs. So many times when organizations don't have a lot of the right metrics, and so we go out and find out, and hence we got new metrics. That allows us to assess ourselves and go forward. As my voice begins to lag, it brings us to the lessons learned. Here we go. Keep it focused. Keep your benchmarking focused. And what this means is that, excuse me, I've now lost my voice. Okay. Keeping benchmarking focused so that you don't go out and benchmark the world. Just benchmark someone that's going to give you information. Independence is important. Having a third party be your go-between. Developing confidentiality and trust between the people you're getting the information from and yourself, that you're not going to use it against them. Doing it systematically. So many times when business process teams, they want to go out and benchmark. And without knowledge or without real understanding, they start making phone calls. And that does one bad thing. It lets people know that you're onto them or that you're trying to do something new. So you want to have a systematic approach. You don't want to do it haphazardly. You want to focus on the information you truly need. Don't go in and say, hey, tell me all the KPIs you have. You go in and say, we were wondering, how important is cycle time? How do you measure it? How important is ratios? How do you measure it? Go in with good operational definitions so that there's less vagueness when you ask someone a question, that you can talk apples to apples. And validate with the person you're benchmarking with. So if I have a clear definition and I have them explain it to us, validate it back by saying, do I understand it? And the most important thing, once you gather this information, you still have to normalize it. A large company versus a small company, a mature company versus a new company, an industry in one type versus an industry in another. You've got to get a normalization. We have a algorithm that we call the complexity factor for the oil and gas. And what that complexity factor does, it takes into account variations from company to company and normalizes them so that the information you get at the end is useful. So lessons learned we have is be systematic, get smart. Don't just do it haphazardly. Now, Brad answered the question by saying it's always easier to benchmark when participants are non-competitors as there is more willingness to share. Obviously, that helps to get more information. The problem is knowing who's a competitor and who's not, because today they can always be a competitor somewhere. But one thing about today, there's more transparency on information than there ever was. Your job is to sift through it and find what could be useful to your organization. Last lesson learned is it's leaving your comfort zone and looking elsewhere. That might be looking elsewhere in your company. Now that says externally versus internally, but non-internal to where you sit. It could be outside of where you sit, but out inside the company. Improving performance, not saying, oh my God, we've been so bad. Trying to learn, not blame. Trying to uncover best practice, not culprits. It's about learning new information that can help us. Benchmarking is not just a quantitative analysis exercise. It's not just a review of what we're doing. It's not industrial tourism. It's all about learning. And this, more important, it's not a standalone. In other words, don't just send somebody out to benchmark. Make sure it's tied into some program you have. With these lessons learned, with this information, and with my voice coming back, I hope that we've been able to present probably more information than we have in the past in a very short time. But it's one of those subjects that is rather full of information. So two things I want you to do. I'd like you to fill this last poll out. We have a few minutes for questions. I'm always good for a compliment or two. Since my voice went down the tubes there for a moment, thank you for the compliment. I appreciate that. Scott mentioned on our website that we do have all the archives of these, and yes, we try to do some editing, but unfortunately you're going to hear my voice crackle. But when you go to our website, click up at the top, Resources, Webinars, Archives. That's where you will find them, and I wanted to point that out to everyone because some folks had trouble last time, and I thought I would save Scott the information. As always, I'd like to thank you folks. Any more questions?